When I first moved into the small neighborhood in Cedar Hills, I didn't know anyone. It was a quiet suburban area with tree-lined streets, mailboxes that leaned slightly from years of use, and houses that looked like they had been standing for generations. I had just gone through a big transition in my life, switching jobs, leaving the bustling city, and moving somewhere slower, calmer, and hopefully friendlier. I wanted a fresh start. For the first few weeks, I kept to myself. I was busy unpacking, setting up my new place, and getting used to the silence at night. In the city, I had been lulled to sleep by the sounds of cars, music, and late-night chatter on the sidewalks. Here, I could hear crickets and the wind pushing through the trees. Sometimes, the silence made me feel lonelier than I expected. I realized quickly that I missed human connection, something beyond work emails and casual greetings at the grocery store. That's when I started noticing my next-door neighbor. His name was Daniel Harper, though everyone around seemed to call him Dan. He was in his late 40s, with neatly kept hair that had begun to show streaks of silver. Every morning, like clockwork, he'd walk outside with his coffee mug, pick up the newspaper from his porch, and wave politely if our eyes happened to meet. At first, I only waved back, but something about his calm and steady presence made me curious. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to mow my lawn. It wasn't much, but it needed trimming, and I figured it was a good excuse to be outside. Dan was already out in his yard, working on trimming hedges. After a few minutes, he called over the hedge, "New mower." I laughed, a little surprised that he had spoken first. "Yeah, first time I'm actually using it. Hopefully I don't break it." He smiled, leaning on his hedge trimmer. "If it survives the first run, you're good for at least a few years." That small exchange was the beginning. Over the next few days, we started having more conversations. Sometimes it was just about the weather, other times about the neighborhood. He told me he had lived in Cedar Hills for over 20 years. His wife had passed away 5 years earlier, and his kids were grown and living in different states. I could see in his eyes when he talked about them that he missed having people around, even if he never complained. The more I got to know him, the more I felt drawn to extend some kindness. I remembered how lonely I felt, and I wondered if he felt the same, living in that big house alone. That's when the idea struck me, I should invite him over for dinner. It felt like such a simple gesture, yet I hesitated. Would it be strange? Would he think I was overstepping? After all, we had only recently gotten past the polite wave stage. But something inside me nudged me forward. I wanted to make this neighborhood feel like home, and maybe this was the way to start. One Friday evening, while I was heading back from the mailbox, I saw Dan watering his plants. Gathering my courage, I called out, "Hey, Dan. I was wondering, would you like to come over for dinner tomorrow night? I'm making roast chicken, and it's way too much for just me." He looked at me, almost surprised, then smiled warmly. "That sounds really nice. Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I said, maybe a little too quickly, but I meant it. "All right then," he said with a nod. "What time should I come by?" "7 works." "7 it is." The moment he agreed, I felt both excitement and nervousness. Hosting someone in my new home for the first time made me realize how bare my dining room still was. I spent the next day preparing. I cleaned, set the table with the nicest dishes I had, and even bought a small bouquet of flowers for the center. I wanted the evening to feel special, not because of appearances but because I wanted Dan to know he was welcome. When he arrived right at 7, holding a bottle of red wine, I was touched by the gesture. "I didn't know what to bring," he said. "But I figured this might go well with dinner." "It's perfect," I said, smiling as I invited him in. The meal went better than I could have imagined. We ate, laughed, and shared stories. I told him about why I moved to Cedar Hills, and he told me about his years working as a mechanic and how much he loved restoring old cars. He talked about his wife, Anna, with such tenderness that I could almost see her presence in the room. And he told me about his kids, Matthew and Claire, and how proud he was of them. As the night went on, the conversation grew deeper. Dan admitted that he didn't get invited out much anymore. "Most people are busy with their own lives," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "And I guess I've gotten used to the quiet. But sometimes it gets a little too quiet." I nodded, understanding completely. "That's exactly why I invited you," I admitted. "I know how isolating it can feel. And honestly, I think we could both use some company." He looked at me for a long moment and then gave a smile that seemed filled with gratitude. "I'm glad you did. This means more than you probably realize." That night didn't just end with dinner. It was the beginning of a friendship that grew stronger with time. We started having weekly dinners, alternating between his place and mine. Sometimes it was something fancy, other times it was just pizza on the couch while watching an old movie. But each time, the bond grew deeper. The neighbors began to notice too. People would see us chatting in the yard or sitting on the porch with coffee. Soon, they started joining in on conversations. It was as if one simple dinner had set off a chain reaction of community building. Where once the street had felt quiet and disconnected, it slowly started buzzing with life. Months later, as the holidays approached, I suggested hosting a neighborhood potluck at my place. Dan jumped in to help organize it, going door to door to invite people. The turnout was amazing. Families brought dishes, kids played in the yard, and laughter filled the air. As I looked around at the warmth and joy that had spread through the neighborhood, I realized that one small act of kindness, an invitation to dinner, had created something bigger than I ever imagined. Dan became more than just my neighbor. He became a friend, almost like family. There were days we'd work together on projects, like fixing a leaky faucet or building shelves. Other days, we'd just sit outside in comfortable silence, watching the sunset. I learned so much from him, not just about tools or cooking tips, but about resilience, gratitude, and the importance of connection. Sometimes, when I think back to that first night, I realize how close I was to not asking at all. Fear of awkwardness or rejection could have stopped me. But because I reached out, both our lives became fuller. The story isn't dramatic in the traditional sense. There were no shocking twists or unexpected dangers. Instead, it's a story about something simple yet profound, the power of kindness and human connection. A meal shared, a conversation started, and a friendship built. Even years later, whenever I look back on my time in Cedar Hills, I know the memory of that first dinner will always stay with me. It was the night a neighbor became a friend, and a house began to feel like a home. And sometimes, that's the kind of story we all need to remember, that the simplest gestures can lead to the most meaningful bonds.